The boarding gate surprise. The soft hum of the airport lounge at San Francisco International Airport buzzed in the background as Sundar Pichai, dressed in a simple charcoal gray suit and white shirt, quietly sipped his green tea and reviewed notes on his tablet. He had an important leadership summit to attend in London, one where key discussions about sustainable technologies and AI ethics would take center stage. But to anyone around him, Sundar looked like just another traveler, unassuming, humble, and polite. It was typical of him to travel without much fanfare. He had long rejected the notion of taking private jets for short-haul or transatlantic flights. Today, he'd be flying commercial first class on Flight 812 of a major international airline. His assistant had booked it deliberately to allow him to experience the customer journey firsthand, something Sundar often insisted upon. As he gathered his belongings and headed toward the boarding gate, the boarding call was announced. First, class passengers and priority members, please proceed to boarding. Sundar joined the queue, standing behind an elderly couple. A few passengers glanced his way, some recognizing him, others oblivious to the fact that the CEO of Google and Alphabet was among them. Seated in 1A on the aircraft, Sundar quietly settled in with a paperback novel on climate change. The cabin crew offered him a welcome drink and he nodded gratefully, his voice calm and low. Just as he was adjusting his seatbelt, the moment that would change the tone of this flight unfolded. A sharply dressed middle-aged man, Mr. Travis Hall, a wealthy businessman known for his brash behavior, strutted into the cabin with an air of entitlement. He threw a glance at Sundar sitting next to his assigned seat, 1B. At first, Travis didn't say much. But within moments of putting away his designer bag, he looked visibly uncomfortable. His face flushed with irritation as he leaned toward the flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said, waving dismissively. "Can you move me to another seat? I'm not comfortable sitting next to him." The flight attendant blinked, confused. "Is there a particular concern, sir?" "Yes, I'm not sitting next to, one of those," Travis said in a low voice, but still audible enough for nearby passengers to hear. His tone dripped with veiled racism and arrogance. "I paid good money for this seat and I expect better company." The flight attendant, Jessica, a composed woman in her early 30s, was taken aback. She glanced toward Sundar, who remained perfectly calm, eyes still on his book. He had heard the words but chose not to react. At least not yet. Jessica responded professionally. "Sir, Mr. Pichai is a valued passenger. We treat all guests with equal respect on this flight. I'm afraid the seat assigned is yours. If you'd like to downgrade to economy where we have some available seats, we can accommodate your request." Travis was stunned. "Downgrade? Are you serious? I'm not the one who should be moved. I have rights and I will not sit next to this foreigner." At this point, several first-class passengers had started paying attention. A quiet murmur spread across the cabin. Phones discreetly started recording. Social media was often hungry for stories, and little did anyone know that today's events would soon go viral. Jessica straightened up. "Sir, I will speak with the purser and the captain, but we do not tolerate discrimination of any kind on board. Please remain seated while I address this matter." She walked away toward the front galley to brief the purser. Sundar finally looked up, catching eyes with the other passengers. He smiled gently at a young woman sitting across the aisle, who mouthed silently, "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this." He nodded in appreciation. Meanwhile, in the galley, Jessica explained what had happened to Chief Purser Monica, a seasoned and respected crew leader. "He's making a scene," Jessica said, "and the man he's complaining about is Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google." Monica's eyes widened momentarily. "Oh my. Well, this is unacceptable. We will handle it." As Monica returned to the cabin, Sundar placed his book down and calmly stood to greet her. "Good evening," he said softly. "I apologize if I'm causing any inconvenience. I'm happy to move to another seat if it avoids disruption." But Monica shook her head firmly. "Mr. Pichai, you have done nothing wrong. We stand with you. You will remain in your seat." Turning to Travis, Monica's tone hardened, though still impeccably professional. "Sir, as the chief purser of this flight, I must inform you that our airline enforces a strict policy against discrimination. You have two choices. Remain in your assigned seat and treat your fellow passenger with respect, or disembark this flight immediately. The captain has been informed and will support this decision. Travis, now realizing that things were not going his way, turned red with anger. I will report this. You have no idea who I am, and I'm afraid you have no idea who Mr. Pichai is either, Monica replied without a trace of irony. A ripple of soft chuckles passed through the cabin. Several passengers began clapping lightly. Phones continued recording. Sundar, maintaining his calm, sat back down and simply said, "There is enough division in the world already. We must always choose understanding over fear." The wisdom in his words further endeared him to the onlookers. In the end, Travis begrudgingly remained seated, though clearly humiliated. Monica and Jessica ensured that extra attention was given to Mr. Pichai during the flight. Passengers quietly came up to him throughout the journey to express their support. But the story did not end there. As the flight progressed and the video clips made their way to X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram, hashtags like "Stand with Sundar" and "Kindness in the Skies" began trending worldwide. By the time the plane landed in London, millions had already viewed the incident, praising both the crew's professionalism and Sundar's grace under pressure. And this was only the beginning of what would become an extraordinary moment of global reflection. The world wakes up. The plane began its descent over the sprawling expanse of London. The morning light peeked through the thin cloud cover, painting soft golden rays over the city's skyline. In the first-class cabin of Flight 812, an unusual sense of unity had taken hold among the passengers. Despite the tension that had unfolded earlier with Mr. Travis Hall's outburst, Sundar Pichai had quietly turned the mood with his extraordinary composure. His words, calm, humble, and full of wisdom, still echoed in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the scene. Monica and Jessica, the flight crew members who had courageously stood their ground against bigotry, remained professional but visibly inspired by the overwhelming support that had emerged for their decision. As the aircraft touched down with a soft thud at Heathrow Airport, Sundar placed his book back in his bag and adjusted his glasses. He glanced around the cabin, acknowledging with a subtle nod the passengers who had discreetly supported him. Across the aisle, the young woman who had earlier mouthed her apology smiled warmly. A man 2 rows behind gave a small thumbs up. The entire cabin seemed quietly aware that something profound had taken place. Yet Sundar remained rooted in his humility, refusing to let the incident cloud his demeanor. Unknown to him, however, the story was already spiraling into a global sensation. During the 9-hour flight, the video clips of the confrontation had been uploaded by passengers with blazing speed. By the time the plane taxied to the gate, Sundar's phone began buzzing silently in his jacket pocket, messages pouring in from colleagues, friends, and news agencies alike. Even before stepping off the plane, hashtags like "Stand with Sundar," "Equality in the Skies," and "Kindness Wins" had already begun trending across multiple social media platforms. Monica approached Sundar at the end of the flight, her eyes soft but professional. "Mr. Pichai, on behalf of our entire crew, I would like to thank you for your grace today. We deeply regret that you had to experience such behavior on our flight. I hope we were able to handle it to your satisfaction." Sundar looked her directly in the eye and replied with quiet sincerity, "You handled it with dignity and fairness. The strength you and your team showed today matters more than you know. The world needs more people like you." With that, he extended his hand, which Monica shook gratefully, knowing she had met a leader not just in title, but in spirit. As Sundar exited the aircraft, the airport was already buzzing with unusual activity. A few passengers in the terminal recognized him, whispering excitedly as they spotted him walking through immigration. Meanwhile, his phone continued its silent storm of notifications. His assistant, Priya, had been following the developments online and was waiting just beyond customs, her face a mixture of concern and urgency. As soon as she saw him, she hurried over. Sundar, she began, her voice low but earnest. The video from the flight. It's everywhere. News channels are covering it. Journalists are asking for statements. Even some human rights organizations have reached out. It's become a global moment. Sundar absorbed the news with characteristic calm. I see, he said simply. They moved toward the waiting car. Priya handed him a tablet with streams of headlines already populating the world's news feeds. Racist outburst on flight to London. Sundar Pichai responds with grace, read one. Another headline blared. Airline crew praised for standing up against discrimination. CEO of Google commends their courage. Social media was ablaze with clips from the flight, and Sundar's words, "We must always choose understanding over fear," had been quoted, shared, and immortalized across countless platforms. Despite his innate desire to avoid the spotlight when it came to personal matters, Sundar understood the responsibility that came with being a public figure. The incident had sparked a much-needed global conversation on racism, privilege, and dignity, and the world was watching. After settling into the hotel suite, Sundar convened a brief virtual meeting with his closest advisors. I do not want this to become a personal story about me, he told them firmly. This is about values, about how we treat one another as human beings. Let's make sure that message stays at the forefront. Meanwhile, Travis Hall, the passenger whose outburst had caused the scandal, was facing a different kind of storm. His identity had been swiftly uncovered by internet sleuths. His company's board was already in crisis talks, and his public reputation had crumbled overnight. News outlets reported that sponsors had begun pulling out of deals associated with his businesses. Yet amidst this, Sundar's team had refused to gloat or exploit the situation. In internal communications, Sundar was clear. Let us rise above anger. Let us lead with empathy. The airline, too, released an official statement commending the actions of its flight crew and reiterating its zero-tolerance policy on discrimination. The statement praised Monica and Jessica by name, noting that their professionalism exemplified the airline's core values. The public responded with overwhelming support, flooding the airline's channels with messages of gratitude and pledges of loyalty. Later that afternoon, in a rare move, Sundar agreed to record a short public statement, not as a corporate CEO, but as a fellow human being. Seated in a simple chair with a plain backdrop, he spoke directly into the camera. What happened on that flight is unfortunately not an isolated event, but it is an opportunity to remind ourselves that dignity belongs to everyone, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or what they believe. Kindness and empathy are not signs of weakness. They are the foundation of a better world. Let's choose them, again and again. The video was released across Google's social platforms and Sundar's personal accounts. Within hours, it had garnered millions of views, accompanied by a flood of supportive comments from individuals across the globe, celebrities, activists, everyday citizens alike. Messages poured in from those who had experienced similar discrimination, many sharing how the video had given them hope. Journalists hailed the speech as a masterclass in leadership during turbulent times. Yet amidst all the attention, Sundar remained unchanged. That evening, as the city of London buzzed with the latest headlines, he took a quiet walk near the Thames, reflecting on the ripple effects of a single moment. The moon hung low, shimmering on the water, as if reminding him that the fight for dignity was as constant and vast as the tides. He knew that the coming days would bring more interviews, more requests, and more scrutiny. But in his heart, one truth stood unwavering. Leadership, real leadership, meant standing tall not in moments of triumph, but in moments of challenge. As he gazed out over the river, a quiet determination filled him. This was no longer just about a flight. It was about using this platform, however unexpectedly it had arrived, to inspire change, subtle, meaningful change in the hearts of those who were watching. And thus, as the world awakened to the story of Flight 812, the journey toward greater understanding had only just begun. The ripple effect. The dawn of a new day in London had barely broken when Sundar Pichai awoke to an overwhelming cascade of messages. His phone, tablet, and email servers had been flooded overnight, not only from familiar faces within Google and Alphabet, but from leaders of corporations, heads of NGOs, educators, civil rights advocates, and countless everyday individuals. His quiet reflection on the banks of the Thames the night before now seemed distant, overtaken by the undeniable momentum of a growing global conversation. Sundar understood clearly. What had happened aboard Flight 812 had transcended a momentary incident. It had become a mirror in which societies around the world were now examining their own reflections. Even before he began reading through the messages, Sundar's first instinct was to check on those who had been directly involved. Jessica and Monica, the two flight crew members whose courage and professionalism had been integral to turning the tide of the incident. Through the airline's senior management, he arranged to personally reach out to them. Within hours, a private video call was organized. On one side of the screen, Sundar appeared, his demeanor as humble as ever. On the other side were Monica and Jessica, visibly emotional, having just emerged from a whirlwind of attention they had never anticipated. The airline had received thousands of emails and social media messages praising their conduct, and media outlets were requesting interviews. Both women felt equal parts proud and overwhelmed. First, Sundar began with gentle sincerity. I want to thank both of you, not just for how you handled the situation, but for showing the world what integrity looks like in action. You didn't hesitate. You stood up not because of who I am, but because it was the right thing to do. That means everything. Monica, her voice steady but soft, replied, Mr. Pichai, we were simply doing what we were trained to do. But I must say, your calm response helped us all stay composed. It gave us strength, Jessica added. I've been a flight attendant for 10 years. I've never seen such a situation handled with such grace. Sundar smiled warmly. Please call me Sundar, and know this. You have inspired millions. I hope this is just the beginning of a larger conversation. Meanwhile, the world beyond the video call was stirring in ways that no one had fully anticipated. Corporate leaders across industries were issuing statements of solidarity, emphasizing their own commitments to diversity and inclusion. Schools and universities were using Sundar's video statement as a teaching moment, encouraging discussions about empathy and equality. Civil rights organizations had launched new campaigns around the incident, using hashtags like kindness, in the skies, and dignity for all to anchor their messages. Even within Google, employees were sharing stories of moments when they had witnessed or experienced discrimination, inspired by their CEO's example of humility and resilience. Notably, some of the most powerful responses came from unexpected corners. World-renowned athletes, artists, and even rival tech CEOs publicly praised Sundar's handling of the incident. One such message came from an executive at a competing company who tweeted, "Leadership isn't about market share, it's about character." Today, Sundar Pichai reminded us all of that. The tweet went viral, amassing millions of likes and further fueling the conversation. The story had clearly struck a chord, one that resonated far beyond the initial event. As Sundar and his team navigated the unfolding media frenzy, he remained steadfast in his core message. "We will not let this become about me," he reminded his communications director during a strategy meeting. "This must remain about the values we stand for: empathy, dignity, and the courage to do what is right." With that in mind, Google announced a new internal initiative, a global day of dialogue on diversity and empathy, to be observed across all company offices. The event would feature discussions, workshops, and guest speakers, encouraging employees at every level to engage in meaningful conversations about bias, inclusion, and the power of kindness. As preparations for this initiative got underway, Sundar received an invitation from the airline's CEO for a private meeting. The airline wished to honor Monica and Jessica publicly and had organized a ceremony at their London headquarters. Understanding the importance of amplifying their courage, Sundar accepted. On the day of the event, he arrived quietly, accompanied by Priya and a few close aides. The ceremony was intimate but deeply moving. Airline employees, from executives to cabin crew, filled the room. Monica and Jessica stood humbly at the front as the CEO commended their actions. Then, in a surprise gesture, he invited Sundar to speak. Standing before the gathering, Sundar began, "I am deeply honored to be here today, not as the CEO of Google, but as a grateful passenger and a fellow human being." Monica and Jessica reminded us that it does not take grand gestures to change the world. Sometimes it takes a single moment of courage, a single decision to stand up for what is right. The room fell silent as his words settled in. He continued, "We must all ask ourselves, in moments of challenge, will we choose fear or will we choose understanding? Today, I hope we all commit to choosing understanding." His words were met with a standing ovation. The ceremony was covered widely by the media, further cementing Monica and Jessica's status as symbols of integrity and compassion. For Sundar, the experience reinforced his belief in the ripple effect of individual actions. Back at his hotel that evening, he reflected once more on the journey that had unfolded in just a few days. He thought of the countless people around, the world who faced discrimination without cameras rolling, without global attention to shield them. He thought of the young children now watching this story unfold. What lessons were they absorbing? What kind of world were they being taught to inherit? That night, Sundar drafted a new post for his personal blog titled, "Moments That Matter." In it, he wrote, "Our lives are composed of moments. Some pass unnoticed, while others demand our presence, our courage, and our compassion." Flight 812 was such a moment, not because of who was involved, but because of what it revealed about who we can choose to be. Let us choose empathy, not just in the headlines, but in the small, unseen corners of our daily lives. The post was published the next morning and quickly became one of the most shared articles on the internet. As the days progressed, the impact of the incident continued to grow. Major airlines reviewed and strengthened their anti-discrimination training programs. Corporations pledged new efforts toward fostering inclusive cultures. Sundar's personal message became a touchstone in countless discussions about leadership, dignity, and the quiet power of empathy. And amid all of this, Monica and Jessica became invited speakers at conferences and forums, sharing their experience and inspiring others to stand up against prejudice in all its forms. Yet through it all, Sundar remained grounded. He returned to his work, quietly pushing forward with initiatives aimed at using technology to bridge divides and foster understanding. In private conversations, he often reminded his team, "The true measure of this moment is not how many people talk about it today, but how many lives we can help change tomorrow." It was this unwavering focus that ensured the story of Flight 812 would endure not as a fleeting headline, but as a catalyst for lasting change. As he prepared for the final leg of his trip, a keynote address at the London Leadership Summit, Sundar understood that the story had only just begun. The world was listening, the opportunity was now, and the message was clear. In every moment, we have the power to choose empathy. And when we do, we change the world. One moment, one person, one act of kindness at a time. A keynote that moves the world. London's sky stretched in a muted gray as Sundar Pichai prepared for his appearance at the highly anticipated Global Leadership and Ethics Summit, an event that gathered some of the most influential minds from technology, politics, education, and social justice from across the globe. The summit, scheduled months in advance, had originally planned to focus on topics such as AI ethics, corporate responsibility, and innovation-driven societal progress. But in light of the viral Flight 812 incident, the organizers had reached out to Sundar to request that he address not just technology, but the deeper question now rippling through societies worldwide: how leaders could foster greater empathy, dignity, and inclusion in their spheres of influence. Sundar had spent the prior evening crafting his keynote address with careful intention. This was not to be a lecture about corporate performance or technological prowess. It would be, he decided, an invitation to introspection, a call for every leader to examine the invisible yet powerful culture they nurtured within their organizations and within themselves. His approach was simple. If the Flight 812 moment had touched millions, it was not because of his status or celebrity, but because it had illuminated a shared yearning for decency and humanity in an increasingly polarized world. The summit hall was packed. Cameras from major networks lined the back, and journalists filled the press rows. Among the crowd were fellow tech CEOs, human rights advocates, members of parliament, educators, and students, all of whom were eager to hear from the man who had, over the past week, become a quiet beacon of dignity amid a maelstrom of prejudice and division. As Sundar was introduced, the room erupted in applause. The host noted, "In a world often captivated by power and profit, today's speaker reminded us that true leadership begins with kindness." Sundar took the stage with his characteristic humility, dressed not in a flashy suit but in his usual understated style, embodying the very message he was about to deliver. He began slowly, allowing his words to land with measured weight. "A week ago," he said, "I boarded a flight like any other, a simple journey across the Atlantic. But during that flight, an incident unfolded that none of us had anticipated. It was not a grand event. It was a moment that exposed both the fragility and the resilience of our shared humanity." He paused, scanning the attentive faces before him. "I have been asked many times over the past few days why I remained calm. The truth is simple. I believe that in every challenge lies a choice. We can choose fear, or we can choose understanding." As he continued, Sundar deftly wove the story of Flight 812 into a larger narrative about leadership and culture. "It is not enough," he stated firmly, "for companies to issue statements of solidarity or adopt diversity policies. The true test lies in the small moments, in the words we choose, in the dignity we extend to others, especially when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable to do so." Monica and Jessica, the flight crew members whose courage has now inspired millions, did not consult a handbook in that moment. They acted from a place of values, a place we must all strive to reach. Throughout the speech, Sundar avoided moral grandstanding. Instead, he invited the audience to reflect on their own influence. "Each of you here today," he said, "carries a sphere of impact, be it a classroom, a boardroom, a city council, or a community. The culture you create within that sphere can either widen the circle of empathy or narrow it. The choice is yours, and it is one you must make not once, but again and again." As Sundar reached the final portion of his address, the room was utterly silent, hanging on every word. Technology connects us as never before, but connection without compassion is hollow. Progress without empathy is dangerous. In a world racing toward the future, let us not forget that the true measure of our advancement lies in how we treat one another. That is the legacy worth building. He closed with a gentle smile and a simple invitation. Let us choose to lead with humanity. The standing ovation that followed was not the polite applause of a conference audience. It was a genuine, sustained outpouring of respect and resonance. After the keynote, Sundar was approached by a steady stream of attendees, many of whom shared their own experiences of discrimination or moments when they had felt powerless to intervene. Among them was a young teacher from India, Asha Patel, who had traveled to London on a fellowship. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Mr. Pichai, when I saw the video from your flight, I cried. Not because it shocked me, but because it gave me hope. My students face discrimination every day. Now I can show them that dignity is possible, even in the hardest moments." Sundar took her hands gently and replied, "You are the leader your students need. Keep showing them that hope is stronger than hate." Meanwhile, the story's impact continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Several major corporations announced new empathy-focused leadership training programs, citing Sundar's speech as an impetus. Universities began organizing seminars around inclusive leadership and moral courage, often referencing the Flight 812 incident as a modern case study. Civil rights organizations in multiple countries launched awareness campaigns, using clips From Sundar's speech to inspire broader public dialogue, perhaps most moving were the personal messages that continued to pour in. From a father in Germany who had long struggled to explain racism to his biracial children, to a nurse in Brazil who had stood up for a patient facing discrimination, countless individuals shared how the story had emboldened them to act with greater empathy in their own lives. Sundar read many of these messages late into the night, each one a testament to the power of a single moment to ripple outward in ways no algorithm could predict. Amid this tide of global attention, Sundar remained mindful of his central mission, to ensure the story remained focused on universal values, not personal heroism. In every interview, he reiterated the same core message. This is not about me. It is about all of us, about the kind of world we wish to create together. True to form, he continued his usual work routine, declining offers for high-profile media specials or documentary deals. Instead, he prioritized quiet conversations with teams across Google and Alphabet, ensuring that the company's own culture reflected the values now championed on the global stage. One afternoon, while attending a roundtable discussion on corporate ethics, Sundar was approached by a well-known journalist who asked, "Mr. Pichai, do you think this movement will last? Or will it fade with the next news cycle?" Sundar paused thoughtfully before answering. Movements do not live or die in headlines. They live in the hearts of people. If each person who was touched by this story chooses empathy in one more moment, just one, that is how the movement endures. In the quiet of his hotel room that evening, Sundar reflected once more on the journey that had unfolded from that single uncomfortable moment on Flight 812. He thought of Monica and Jessica, of Asha and her students, of the countless unseen acts of courage now inspired by the story, and he resolved once again to keep choosing empathy, not just on stages or in statements, but in the smallest, most ordinary moments of life. For Sundar Pichai understood a truth that would guide him always. The most powerful form of leadership is not that which commands attention, but that which quietly shapes the world through acts of kindness, courage, and unwavering humanity. An unexpected letter. After days of whirlwind events in London, Sundar Pichai found himself once again seated on a flight, this time bound for his home in California. The aircraft hummed softly as it climbed above the patchwork of English countryside, the early evening sun streaking long golden beams through the cabin windows. Though the summit had ended with great success and an unprecedented global outpouring of support, Sundar carried no illusion that his role in this unfolding movement was complete. If anything, the past week had reinforced his belief that creating lasting cultural change required sustained, quiet work, not grand gestures alone, but daily choices that reflected one's values even when no one was watching. Seated alone in the cabin with his laptop closed and a journal resting in his lap, Sundar reflected on the faces he had seen at the summit. The eager young teacher from India, corporate executives pledging change, human rights advocates carrying worn notebooks filled with stories of resilience. The narrative that had begun with a single ugly outburst on Flight 812 had transformed into a living conversation, spanning countries and communities. And yet, amid the accolades and speeches, Sundar's thoughts often returned to a quieter question. How could he ensure that this moment seeded lasting compassion beyond the headlines? As the plane crossed the Atlantic, Sundar drafted a personal letter he intended to share internally with all Google and Alphabet employees upon his return. It would not be a corporate memo. Instead, he chose the format of a personal reflection, inviting his colleagues to embrace empathy not as a policy, but as a way of living and working. He wrote, "Every day we interact with people whose experiences we cannot fully know, but what we can offer is the simple, powerful choice of dignity. Whether in a board meeting or a coffee line, whether facing a peer or a stranger, we can choose to honor their humanity. This is leadership, not the kind found in titles or stock charts, but in hearts." Upon landing at San Francisco International Airport, Sundar was met by his trusted aide Priya and a few members of his personal staff. While the media awaited his arrival outside, eager for sound bites, Sundar quietly slipped through a side entrance, choosing once again to forego the performative. aspects of public life. He had already said what he needed to say. Now was the time for quieter action. Returning home, Sundar welcomed the embrace of his family. His wife, Anjali, greeted him warmly, her expression a blend of pride and concern. Over a late dinner, they discussed the impact of the events and the many stories that had reached them. But it was the next morning, over coffee in his study, that a single envelope would profoundly move Sundar once again. Among the usual stack of documents and correspondence sat a simple, unmarked envelope addressed by hand. Curious, Sundar opened it to reveal a letter written on plain paper. The handwriting was neat but unpolished, the kind one might expect from a child or someone unaccustomed to formal letters. As he began to read, the words gripped his heart. Dear Mr. Pichai, my name is Maya. I am 14 years old, and I live in Texas. My family moved here from Pakistan when I was very little. Sometimes when people look at me or my parents, they treat us like we don't belong. At school, I try to stay quiet so no one will notice me too much. But last week, my mom showed me the video of you on the plane. She cried when she saw how calm you were. Then I cried too, because for the first time, I saw someone who looked like us, standing tall and strong when someone was being mean. It made me feel like maybe I can be brave too. I wanted to say thank you. I hope one day I can be like you. Sundar read the letter twice, then a third time, his fingers tracing the paper gently. In all the global headlines, in all the corporate responses, no single message had resonated as deeply as Maya's words. For here was the true measure of the moment, not in viral trends or public praise, but in the heart of a young girl who had seen a reflection of hope where she had previously felt invisibility. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk, then sat in quiet contemplation. The story had indeed reached millions, but Maya's voice crystallized its deepest meaning. The real legacy of leadership lay in whether it empowered others to find their own courage. Determined to honor this truth, Sundar drafted a personal reply that very morning. Dear Maya, thank you for your beautiful letter. You are braver than you know. Speaking your truth takes courage, and the fact that you wrote to me shows the strength already within you. Always remember, your worth is not determined by anyone else's ignorance. You belong, you matter, and the world needs your voice. I hope you will continue to stand tall, knowing that your story is as important as anyone's. With warmest regards, Sundar. He entrusted the reply to his assistant, ensuring it would reach Maya privately. Then, moved by the experience, Sundar shared Maya's story without revealing her identity during a closed Google leadership call later that week. Speaking to thousands of managers and team leads across the company, he said, leadership is not about responding when cameras are rolling. It's about the unseen choices we make, the dignity we extend when no one is watching. If this story has taught us anything, let it be that each of us has the power to make someone feel seen, heard, and valued. Do not underestimate that power. Meanwhile, as the empathy movement continued to grow, an unexpected invitation reached Sundar's office, an invitation that would once again test his resolve. The airline that operated Flight 8112 had decided to organize a global forum on dignity and inclusion in air travel and beyond, bringing together aviation leaders, human rights advocates, corporate executives, and government representatives. They requested that Sundar deliver the keynote address to help anchor the conversation in lived values, not mere policy language. After careful reflection, Sundar accepted. Not because he sought more attention, but because the platform offered a rare opportunity to further the conversation on a global scale. He prepared for the event with his characteristic humility, determined to keep the focus on universal values rather than personal acclaim. His central message would be simple, that dignity is not a privilege reserved for some but a birthright owed to all. As preparations for the forum progressed, Sundar also continued his quieter efforts. He worked closely with Google's HR and leadership teams to implement deeper empathy training within the organization. He encouraged the development of new AI tools designed to detect and mitigate bias in digital interactions. And he championed initiatives aimed at supporting underrepresented communities in tech, understanding that systemic change required both cultural shifts and structural action. Through it all, Sundar kept Maya's letter on his desk, a constant reminder of the true stakes of this journey. Leadership, he knew, was not about grand pronouncements. It was about the lives one could quietly touch, the hearts one could inspire, and the unseen ripples that might one day turn into waves of change. As the date of the global forum approached, Sundar remained grounded in this understanding. The world might be watching, but for him the real question remained unchanged. How could he help create a world where young girls like Maya would no longer need a viral video to feel seen? Where dignity was the norm, not the exception. It was a question he would carry forward, into the forum, into his leadership, and into every moment that followed. A legacy of dignity. The stage was set beneath the soaring glass atrium of the International Forum for Dignity in Aviation and Corporate Leadership, held in Geneva, a city long associated with human rights and diplomacy. The forum, born out of the incident aboard Flight 812, had quickly evolved into a landmark global event, drawing representatives from more than 60 nations, airlines, corporate leaders, human rights groups, educators, and activists. Its aim was clear: to transform the lessons of one viral moment into a worldwide conversation on embedding empathy and dignity across industries and societies. For Sundar Pichai, the journey to this stage had been neither sought nor planned. But, as he prepared backstage, reviewing his notes one last time, he understood that the responsibility was now larger than himself. The story had captured hearts because it was universal, because it illuminated both the wounds of prejudice and the healing power of courage and compassion. He had chosen to embrace this opportunity not for personal acclaim, but because young voices like Maya's, still trembling between hope and fear, deserved a world where dignity was not contested but celebrated. As the session began, dignitaries and corporate leaders filled the Grand Hall, while tens of millions worldwide tuned in via live streams. The moderator, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, opened the session with words that underscored the forum's gravity. The measure of a civilization is not in its technology or wealth, but in how it treats its most vulnerable members. Today, we gather to examine that measure and to raise it. Then, as the audience stood in welcome, Sundar Pichai stepped onto the stage, greeted by a warm, sustained applause. Dressed in his usual understated manner, he exuded not the grandeur of corporate power, but the quiet strength of someone who had faced ugliness with unyielding grace. As he reached the podium, the room fell silent with a kind of collective anticipation. He began not with a speech but with a story, his own. One seat on a plane, one moment of choice, one confrontation with the kind of prejudice that still stains far too many spaces, he said softly. When that moment unfolded aboard Flight 812, I did not know that the world was watching, but it taught me this. When confronted with hate, our response must be rooted in humanity. In that moment, I was not a CEO. I was simply a fellow human being, choosing dignity over anger. Sundar then expanded the narrative, moving from personal experience to shared values. Every organization, every leader must ask, what kind of culture are we nurturing? Is it one where dignity is defended even when no one is watching? Or one where silent complicity allows prejudice to persist? His words hung in the air, each sentence delivered with deliberate calm, inviting not defensiveness but reflection. He called upon industries, not just aviation but all sectors, to embed empathy into their core values and operational practices. It is not enough to issue public statements after a crisis. We must build cultures where crises are less likely to occur because dignity is protected at every level. He emphasized practical measures: inclusive hiring, empathy-based leadership training, systems to empower bystanders to intervene, and relentless commitment to transparency and accountability. Yet it was when Sundar spoke of Maya's letter that the room was most deeply moved. Without naming her, he shared the story of the young girl who had written to him. Her words reminded me why this matters beyond headlines and hashtags. Because for every Maya who finds hope in such a moment, there are countless others who still wonder if they will ever be seen, if they will ever be safe. We must ensure they are, not someday, but now. As he reached the conclusion of his address, Sundar's voice remained steady, but charged with quiet conviction. Leadership is not about the titles we hold, but the humanity we uphold. In boardrooms, classrooms, airports, and streets, let us be the ones who choose dignity, not because the world is watching, but because that is who we choose to be. The standing ovation that followed was not merely for Sundar's speech, but for the movement it had helped ignite. A movement grounded in the simple yet profound truth that every person is worthy of respect and compassion. Following the address, Sundar participated in several roundtable discussions, working alongside airline executives to craft a global framework for dignity and inclusion in air travel. The framework emphasized preventive education, empowered crew intervention, passenger awareness campaigns, and transparent accountability processes. It was adopted by numerous major airlines within months, a tangible, lasting outcome born from what had begun as a painful in-flight encounter. Yet amid the policy work and public appearances, it was a private moment that would leave the deepest mark on Sundar. After the forum, as he prepared to depart, his aide Priya approached him with an unexpected message. Maya's family had reached out through a trusted intermediary. They wished to meet Sundar, not for publicity, but to personally thank him. After careful consideration, Sundar agreed to a private meeting arranged in a quiet community center, away from cameras and fanfare. When he entered the modest room, he was greeted by Maya's parents, her mother with tears in her eyes, her father standing with quiet pride, and by Maya herself, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and determination. For a moment, words eluded them all. Then Maya stepped forward and, without hesitation, embraced Sundar. "Thank you," she whispered. "You made me believe I can be strong too." Sundar knelt to her level, his voice soft. "You already are strong, Maya. Never doubt that." The two spoke for some time, joined by Maya's parents, who shared their struggles and hopes. Sundar listened intently, reaffirming his commitment to ensuring that Maya's generation would inherit a world less scarred by hate. Before leaving, he gifted Maya a simple leather-bound journal. "Write your story," he told her. "The world needs your voice." As Sundar left that day, the sun setting in soft hues beyond the horizon, he felt a deep sense of peace. The journey that had begun with a confrontation of prejudice had led here to a moment of connection, of healing, of hope. The story of Flight 812 would fade from headlines in time, as all stories do. But its true legacy would endure in the unseen choices made by countless individuals, inspired to lead with greater empathy. Back at Google's campus, Sundar continued to champion these values, quietly, consistently, without seeking further acclaim. The internal empathy initiative he had launched gained momentum, inspiring new programs across Alphabet's global offices. Other corporations followed suit, recognizing that embedding dignity into culture was not just morally right, but essential for sustainable leadership. And across the world, from classrooms to boardrooms, from airline cabins to neighborhood streets, people remembered the man who had faced hate with grace, and the flight crew who had stood for dignity without hesitation. Their story became a living reminder that leadership is not a function of title or power, but of the simple, courageous choice to uphold the humanity of others, moment by moment, day by day. As for Maya, she began writing in her journal. Her first entry was simple yet profound. "Today I learned that one voice can change the world. Maybe mine can too." And with that, the ripples of Flight 812 continued, ever expanding, ever reminding us all that in choosing dignity, we choose a better world. The journey continues. Months had passed since the now world-famous incident aboard Flight 812, yet its ripples showed no signs of subsiding. Across industries, Conversations about dignity, empathy, and leadership had grown deeper and more intentional. Many organizations had embraced the movement that Sundar Pichai's example had ignited, not as a fleeting corporate gesture, but as a genuine commitment to change. Yet amid the headlines and speaking invitations that continued to flow his way, Sundar remained acutely aware of the limits of visibility. The greatest test of a movement, he knew, was not whether it trended in public forums, but whether it transformed quiet, unseen interactions where prejudice so often thrived unchecked. At Google and Alphabet, Sundar doubled down on his internal efforts. He launched a company-wide initiative called Every Moment Matters, focused on empowering employees at every level to recognize and respond to moments of exclusion and bias, whether in hiring, team dynamics, customer interactions, or broader community engagements. The program was not mandatory in the conventional sense. Instead, it invited participation through deeply personal storytelling workshops, empathy-building exercises, and leadership coaching rooted in authentic human connection rather than abstract metrics. Sundar himself attended several of these sessions quietly, sitting in small circles with employees from across departments, listening more than speaking. During one such session, an engineer shared a story of being overlooked in meetings due to his accent. Another spoke of subtle biases she faced as a woman of color in technical leadership. A marketing associate recounted an incident of being mistaken for a junior staffer despite years of experience. Sundar listened intently to each account, his heart weighed equally by their pain and their courage. When his turn to speak came, he offered no platitudes, only this: leadership is not about perfection, it is about presence. We will not eliminate every moment of bias overnight, but we can be present in those moments. We can choose courage over comfort, empathy over apathy, and we must. Beyond Google's walls, Sundar's advocacy took on new dimensions. In collaboration with the International Forum for Dignity, he helped establish the Global Council on Empathy and Leadership, an independent cross-sector body committed to developing and sharing best practices for cultivating inclusive cultures across industries. The Council's work emphasized storytelling as a powerful vehicle for empathy, urging leaders to engage with narratives that challenge their perspectives and deepen their understanding of others' lived experiences. At home, Sundar remained grounded by the simple routines that had always anchored him. Evening walks with Anjali, reading to their children, quiet mornings spent journaling reflections. Yet one story continued to hold a special place in his heart: Maya's. Since their private meeting, Sundar had stayed in gentle correspondence with her family, respecting their wish for privacy while offering encouragement and mentorship. Maya's journal entries, occasionally shared through her mother, revealed a blossoming voice, a young girl no longer afraid to be seen. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sundar received an envelope bearing familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Maya. Dear Mr. Pichai, I started a club at my school called Voices of Dignity. At first, only a few friends joined, but now more and more students are coming. We talk about how to stand up for each other. Sometimes, it's scary, but we remember what you said, that every moment matters. I wanted you to know that your story didn't just change one flight, it's changing my school. Thank you for believing in me. The letter moved Sundar more than any accolade or award ever could. Here was the true measure of impact, not in the size of stages or the number of views, but in the quiet courage of a 14-year-old girl helping others find their voice. With deep gratitude, Sundar penned a heartfelt reply, encouraging Maya to continue leading with compassion and resilience. Meanwhile, the airline that had hosted Flight 8 and 12 reported significant cultural shifts. Monica and Jessica, now global ambassadors for the company's dignity initiatives, led training programs that transformed how crew members across the world approached their role, not merely as providers of service, but as stewards of empathy in the skies. Their sessions often featured clips from the original forum and personal reflections from their experience on Flight 8112. One senior crew member remarked after a session, "I used to think my job was about safety and comfort. Now I understand, it is also about courage." As the anniversary of the incident approached, Sundar was invited to speak at a special commemorative event organized by the International Forum for Dignity. Initially hesitant, wary of centering himself, he ultimately accepted, viewing it as an opportunity to further shift the spotlight toward collective action. His speech at the event struck a different tone than before, not one of reflection, but of challenge. "We have shared stories," he began. "We have held forums. We have changed some policies. But the work is not done. Bias and prejudice still lurk in the unnoticed corners of our organizations and our societies. The true test of this movement is not whether we remember one incident, but whether we remain vigilant in every moment that follows. We must ask ourselves daily, whose dignity are we defending? Whose voices are we uplifting? Whose humanity are we honoring?" His words resonated deeply, reminding all present that dignity is not a destination, but a continuous journey. After the event, Sundar met privately with several grassroots activists working in communities where systemic discrimination remained entrenched. Listening to their stories, he recommitted to using his platform to amplify their work, not through corporate campaigns alone, but by forging authentic partnerships that channeled resources and visibility toward those doing the hardest, most unglamorous work on the ground. As the months unfolded, the legacy of Flight 812 continued to evolve, not as a static story, but as a living movement nurtured by countless unseen acts of courage. Teachers incorporated its lessons into their classrooms. Corporate leaders used it as a case study for empathy and leadership. Airline passengers shared it with fellow travelers, inspiring acts of kindness in everyday moments. And through it all, Sundar remained steadfast in his belief that leadership was not about the moments one was forced to face, but about the choices one made when no one was watching. One evening, during a quiet walk with Anjali, Sundar reflected on the journey. "It began with a seat on a plane," he mused. "But it's not about the seat. It's about who we choose to be when we are seated beside difference. Whether we build walls of fear or bridges of understanding, that choice, every moment, that's the real legacy." And as twilight settled over the horizon, he smiled, knowing that somewhere in Texas a young girl named Maya was helping her peers choose bridges over walls. That somewhere in an airline training room, Monica and Jessica were helping crew members choose courage over complacency. That somewhere in boardrooms and classrooms and living rooms around the world, people were remembering that every moment matters. For Sundar Pichai, the journey continued, not because the work was finished, but because it had only just begun.